Hey guys, yes, I am finally putting together the tuner chassis for this Brunswick radio. Finished painting up this, and I've already remounted the black box capacitor. Last time I showed this, the capacitors were still loose. Well, since then, I did melt some beeswax into the end of the box here, and while it was still warm, I mushed the caps into it, and then bent over the little tabs on this end, so it's on there pretty secure. And I fed the tabs through the top here and bent them over. So now I'm about to wire it back in. Well, while doing so, I was reviewing the photos and this nice high-res wiring diagram, and I came across something kind of odd. It's actually something I noted early on, but I just kind of glossed over it, figuring that I'd work it all out once I got this wiring diagram. And that was this little bit of wire here. This screws in here, and it's a ground lug to the chassis. This little wire sticking out on the end here goes to the central lug on this capacitor block, which is a common ground for all four of the caps inside. This long wire coming off here goes to the volume control. It's ground for one end of the lug. But then there's this little bit of wire here. When I first took a look underneath this chassis, I noticed that it was cut. It would have connected to this wire, which goes around under here and hooks into this capacitor right here. Well, if I look on the wiring diagram, that capacitor is right here. It's a grid condenser. You can see there's several wires coming off. This wire actually goes underneath and goes to this point. So we got two wires coming off here. One goes to the tuning ganged capacitor, the other goes to this coil. Well, and there's also another wire coming off, and that goes up around here, and there's a curly Q, and then it goes to nothing. And then here's that point I mentioned going over to here, and then to the volume control. So I think this is some sort of gimmick. What purpose it serves, I'm not entirely sure. It is not on the schematic. So we're looking at this point right here. There's a capacitor, there's the tuning cap, and there's the coil. There's no gimmicky thing shown on there. I think I read some reference to it online, but I've read through numerous restoration threads, and they all kind of blur together at some point. So I'm going to unravel this tape, and I'm curious to see what I'm going to find. I suspect that there is actually no connection between these two wires, and this thinner wire here is just wrapped around a few times and then taped off. And I can only imagine that at some point somebody was fooling around with the radio and they decided if they cut that wire, they'd gain something out of it. Probably gain, as a matter of fact, or maybe there was some feedback that we're trying to get rid of. I don't know. Now, and as far as these caps go, I think I misspoke earlier when I was reading off the schematic. I found numerous versions of the schematic, and not all of them had the components values, so I copied these values down from another schematic, and they were all 160 picofarad. The values in parentheses are what I actually measured, and the values not in parentheses are what were stated on another schematic. So I got 160, 160, 160, and 160. I think in an earlier video, I said that this is 120 picofarad, and that's what I've written down here. That's wrong. That should be 1200 picofarad. And I measured about 900. And you can see I was off a bit on all these caps. What I think I'll do is wire this back in and see how it plays, if it plays at all with these original caps. But I did go ahead and order up replacements. I got 4 160 picofarads and one 1200 picofarad. Oh yeah, it's definitely just a little curly Q of wire. No physical connection between the two wires. So I'm inclined to reconnect this wire the way it originally was connected. And if I have a problem with the radio, I can try cutting it too. I finished wiring all the coils back in and checked and double checked and triple checked my work against my reference photos and this wiring diagram, and everything seems to be okay, which just leaves one major task. Well, actually a pretty minor task, which is to reattach the tuning mechanism, which is pretty easy because you just have to connect 1, 2, 3, 4 little wires up to these lugs on the back, and then I can hook this up to the power supply chassis, and let's try firing this thing up. Okay, I've wired the tuning condenser back in. I populated all the tube sockets. I wired the two chassis together, including a dial lamp. And I have my DC voltmeter attached across the terminal strip here at a point that should be 165 volts. I've got a speaker plugged in, and I've got the set plugged in to the AC power with the 60-watt series light bulb in the line. I expect that that's going to starve the set of some power, but I want to play it safe to start out with. So here goes. Dial light came on right away, that's a good sign. And the bulb is lit up like I figured. I'm starving the set of some power. I should put a higher watt bulb in there really. And we've got about 103 volts DC, that's great, it means nothing's dead shorted anywhere. I can see the tubes lighting up. AD rectifier's pretty dirty, I'm just cleaning off the top there so I can see the filament better. Alright, and I can hear a little bit of a hum out of the speaker. Volume control has no effect, but remember this volume control works off of the antenna input. So I expect the volume control is only going to have effect when you actually are receiving something. Tuning the dial now. So a little something, very faint though. AM 560, which is a good sign because I'm all the way at one end of the tuning dial. And that's grabbing the antenna lead though makes no difference whatsoever. Let's see if we can get a stronger station. It's a little bit louder station. Well, I'm definitely tuning it down. I'm picking up some stations, although it's very weak in the antenna, so it doesn't seem to have much or any effect. I would expect when I grab the antenna that they would increase the volume. Alright, well, I'm going to put a larger watt bulb in there and see what difference that makes. Okay, all the way up to a 150 watt bulb now. Got about 150 volts DC now, and I can see the bulb is light, it's brighter. Radio is a bit louder.
Policies aren't working. Look, if borrowing and spending and taxing
downtown and 95th Street. A little bit slow on the southbound side of the tri-state between the Adams and the O'Hare Oasis. Sunny, high of 71.
Well, I'm going to check my antenna input connection because something doesn't seem to be quite right there.
This report brought to you by Garmin. A Garmin newbie makes every drive easier and not only shows you the way.
Making drinks look so good.
I tried a longer antenna, but that didn't have any effect. I checked the continuity in the rheostat, and that's just fine. I tested all the tubes, and they're okay. I tried wiggling them in their bases, which really didn't have any effect. Now, take a look at the schematic. It's pretty darn simple. Here's the antenna. Goes through that rheostat, ground. Signal's picked up, goes into the grid, into this tube, and then the plate goes into those coils underneath. So I said, well, what would happen if I just pull this tube right out of the circuit? Nothing. Which means that there's something definitely wrong in here. So it's actually just picking up signals out of the air somewhere in this stage. And this first stage is having no effect. Now, there is something else here, which is the RF compensating capacitor, which is down in that hole there, I do believe. There could be something wrong with that, which could be effectively shorting out this signal. So I'm going to grab a screwdriver and try poking around with that and see if it has an effect. I've been doing a little troubleshooting. First I chucked out continuity with the antenna to ground, that's fine. The wiper going to the grid, that's fine. Checked this coil between the plate and the 145 volt bus, that's fine. Then I got to this. One side of the coil is going to the grid and the other side is supposed to be going to ground. Well, if you look, that's the lug right here, and it's not connected to anything. It should be connected to this. Now what this point is down here, look on this wiring diagram, that's the grid. So we're looking at this part of the coil right here, which couples the signal from the first stage to the second stage. And that explains, I hope, why we're not getting any power going through. So got the wire going up to the tuning cap, and it comes down and it's supposed to do a little loop around that tube pin and then go to the coil. So I've just got it going to the tube pin, but it's bypassing the coil. So if I bend this wire over a little bit onto this lug and solder it up, it should make a difference. Okay, I made the repairs. Let's try this again.
And since that classic work by over 100 years ago, there's been a vast continuing line of research, scholarly debate, including the Jesus
volume control
out on the West Coast.
You can't get all the way down to nothing.
To who the historical Jesus was, allowing for occasional doubters to assert, actually, we're not at all sure that he existed. Has there been scholarly discussion in the
Seems to be some feedback at some point.
There's been a little bit, and actually, my book is a distillation of the work of a small group of courageous.
This one actually gets less loud if I grab the end of this.
In the scholarly world, as you well know, they work under pseudonyms like Christoph Luxemburg and some other members of the Inara group.
I kind of had a feeling I wouldn't be able to get the volume all the way down to nothing, because when this first stage was knocked out, I was already receiving a station. Now WGN is a really strong local station, so I think it's just going to come through from everywhere into the radio. So with the way this volume control works, where it just puts the antenna down to ground, even though this may be a ground, if some signal's leaking through these other various stages, you're still going to be able to receive a station.
Member who replaced him.
I was meaning to say. I'm getting confused now. I was meaning to say, I was saying fair. Who was saying fair? Both.
Also, kind of expected the volume control would be having a different effect at one end of the range and at the other, because they did something kind of odd with this control. If you look at an earlier installment of this series, I think I talk about it a little bit. for about 1/3 of the treble, there's actually another bit of resistive wire pressed up against this. I guess it was an early attempt to make like a logarithmic control. So that logarithmic section seems to end right about here. Yeah, let's see what else we can tune in.
You know, maybe get canceled in 95 as well. And then finally, a judge by the name of Sonia Sotomayor put forth a ruling that favored the players, and that's when Donald...
Sounds pretty good, aside from a little bit of hum.
I can instantly watch as many TV episodes and movies as I want.
You don't fear for your life.
Yeah, not really.
Our anatomy.
There you go.
Now I have no basis of comparison for a radio like this because I've never restored a TRF radio of this vintage, so I'll have to rely on some feedback from my viewers as to how loud this should be, how sensitive, and so on, and how that volume control should work.
He's got nothing, no choice. What
To Mohammed. Everyone that came out here proud and in a sense of bringing some closure, obviously, to my family. We're
Alright, so here's a weaker station, and now if I grab the antenna, definitely has an effect. So there's nothing like automatic volume control in radios like this. So you really do have to kind of fiddle around with the antenna and the volume for each station.
And I think, you know, there have been a number of books and articles and all the rest in the last couple of years that have sort of pointed out the fact.
A lot of people feel that way about the NBA. I'll say this. It's practically impossible to fix a game if you're going to pay players. But the fact that Tim Donaghy happened, and so many, in terms of teams getting the number one draw pick, or bad circumstances.
So clearly loud stations, if you put up the volume too loud for a strong station rather, it really overpowers the set. It just kind of cuts out.
She would give a gift to the leader.
Of course, you can talk about the Kardashians.
I don't seem to like the high frequency stations. Well, there's still a lot I can fool around with. Got that little gimmick coil thingy, there's an RF trimmer condenser, and there's those caps that I had measured earlier that were off a bit from what I believe the correct value should be. So I'm going to tinker around with this a bit and see what I can come up with. Well, the first thing I've tried doing is I took that little twisty corkscrew thingy out of the circuit again, and check this out. No more howling or cutoff if I turn the volume up all the way. And the radio's working throughout the entire band now. So I'm at one end of the tuning dial, the high frequency stations.
Measure. There is a group called Hizbah Tahrir.
So I guess somebody kind of knew what they were doing when they cut that out.
radical Islamic group that was set to have a conference in Rolling Meadows, Illinois. This is a
with the discussion about no hitters. Valid point. That be
special people that got calls to these sort of
season.
Yes, and then multiply that by the number of people.
191st.
It's amazing how much of a difference just that little curly cue of wire made in this radio.
And it ran on Sunday afternoons for a long time on W.
That's starting to ring a bell.
Politically, sure it does. There are lots of elections that are decided.
And there's AM 560 the other end of the dial. So yeah, it's working quite well now. And it's about 2 in the morning right now, so I'm going to call it quits for tonight. And hopefully the next part will be the final part. That's all for now, guys.